Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is your host and executive director for the American Institute of Stress. It's Will Huckman. Welcome you back to Finding Contentment. Thanks again for joining us today. I'd really like to ask that all of you who are listening to this podcast today, go to stress.org and subscribe to a magazine. Check out all the information we have. You're going to be surprised how much stuff we have, and all about stress and stress-related issues. Also, if you're watching us, I'm going to ask, please hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe below. I appreciate it. Helps our channel grow. Okay, so today we're tackling what I consider a critical topic: the stress faced by police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and others, first responders. These brave men and women put their lives on the line every day, but the toll it takes on their mental and emotional well-being is often overlooked. And if it's not overlooked, it's just ignored. So in this episode, we'll discuss the unique pressures they face, from traumatic incidences to too long shifts, the weight of constant vigilance, and more importantly, we'll explore maybe some strategies for coping, resources for support, and how we, you and I, as a society, can do better in recognizing and addressing their needs. So whether you're a first responder yourself, or have a loved one in the field, or simply want to understand more about the unseen struggle of these heroes, this conversation is for you. Because joining us today is Dr. Kate Jones. Dr. Jones started her education from Mansfield University, got a master's degree in clinical psychology from Marywood University, and a doctorate of psychology from Immaculata University. And she completed her postdoctoral fellowship at Catawba, if I hope I said that right, Catawba Hospital.
Catawba.
Thank you, Catawba.
You're welcome.
It's a great hospital. They specialize in inpatient treatment for adults and geriatrics. And with over a decade of clinical experience, she's credentialed with PsycPact for inter-jurisdictional telehealth and specializes in trauma and PTSD treatment for civilians and, of course, law enforcement. She also served as clinical director for the Virginia State Police Critical Incident Stress Management Team. And Dr. Jones integrates wellness into her practice as well. She holds a YTT 700 certification in yoga, and she has worked extensively with high-stress professions, including all the ones that I mentioned. She, as the owner of Dr. Jones Psychological Services and Wellness Institute, she also offers outpatient therapy, trauma-sensitive yoga, stress management education, and women's mentorship programs. And her specialties include trauma, PTSD, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, critical incident coping, chronic pain, and of course, stress management. And I'm very happy to welcome, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Kate Jones. Kate, thank you so much for being with us today. It's an important topic, and I really wanted to discuss it with you.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting, and I am just grateful to be here.
Yeah, well, I first noticed what you were doing because I found an article that you were writing about your program, about Leo's going through all the stress and all their stress management problems. The first thing I want to ask you is, how did you get started working with law enforcement and first responders?
I fell backwards into it, and that's usually how most of my wonderful endeavors turn out, is me falling backwards into it. And so to give you a little background, I grew up among first responders. So my father has served since before I can remember on his volunteer fire department. I spent most of my time in a fire hall, so much so I wanted to have my wedding there. I used to dream about it. You'll be happy to know my wedding was not there, but it was lovely. And then, back in 2021, I saw this advertisement. I had worked with law enforcement in an outpatient setting prior to 2021, but I saw this advertisement for a job, and it was a wellness coordinator for Virginia State Police. And I looked at the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and I thought to myself, I could totally do that. And so for the interview, the lieutenant that was going to be on the panel had suggested that I come up with this idea for a law enforcement wellness program. And I got so excited about it, I lost sleep over it. And I just kept thinking, and how do I reach these kids kind of thing? And because it is very stigmatized. And so, I mean, I feel like seeking any type of mental wellness is still kind of stigmatized if it goes above and beyond medication management. And so, just trying to get people to understand the real journey that therapy can be in terms of understanding oneself and exploring, wow, this thing happened and I felt this way. And I was able to not only recognize that experience, but also articulate it in a way that was meaningful and allowed me to connect with another person.
Yeah,
So,
and they have different stressors and mental health issues than, say some other professions. And you're
absolutely.
right. Well, I mean, I do want to talk about the stigma that goes along with that, but because they're different, because they have a different kind of job, and I mean, there's all kinds of issues. But can you break it down or summarize a couple of the common sources of the stress that police, I mean, like you said, firefighters and even paramedics, I've spoken to them, they face these kinds of things daily. What are some of the most common ones?
Well, I feel like we have to think about it from a logistics perspective. So, the average 25-year career in law enforcement, you're likely to experience 180 critical incidents. Now that's loosely defined, but the average civilian is likely to experience two over the course of a lifetime. And so, as you're well aware, stress is very cumulative. So some of the incidents, one of the things that I think makes first responders awesome is that they can compartmentalize their jobs, and they can say, this is just work, right? And they can distance themselves psychologically from it, which is, it speaks volumes to their resilience. One of the problems, though, is when that coping strategy starts to be utilized all the time. And so when you have, for instance, most of the common ones as it relates to critical incidents is when you have a child who happens to be around the same age your child is, who happens to be wearing a similar onesie or a similar t-shirt, and you roll up to the scene of a car accident or a domestic situation, and it's really hard then to use that coping strategy that they've developed over the course of time that is very protective. And so then it starts kind of adding on. And, I feel like a lot of folks nowadays do have those debriefs, but in my experience with some first responders, it's not the debriefs that are the problem. It's not the, hurry up and wait, because that's a huge factor in their careers with the hypervigilance of just sitting there waiting for something to happen. It's when everybody's gone and you're in your car by yourself, and all of a sudden all of the thoughts start to hit. And so I feel like that's huge in terms of triggers to stress, especially if those critical incidents start to accumulate. And, then of course, I feel like some of it's not the critical incidents at all. It's the way that the department is treating them. And so that's a huge one in terms of some folks I've worked with. We spend a great deal of time discussing their problems with the department, the way that morale is, the problems with the limited praise from supervision, where, yeah, that was good, but you could always do it better, right? And so there's a lot of that perfectionistic. And
Right.
I feel like the other thing, this isn't necessarily a term that they use, but I've coined the term the administrative crisis, because we need this paperwork and we need it right now.
Oh,
And
yeah.
in all reality, that's not necessarily true, but you have people who are so accustomed to responding to crises in a very fast solution focused way that it tends to become really problematic with the administrative burden.
I think you
So,
hit the nail right on the head with a couple of things there. One is the debrief. Well, I mean, I'm sure it's a good thing, but I don't want to say it's a waste of time. But cops know what to say to get back on the road. They want to get back to their job. They know what to say, especially veteran cops. So I think you're right. I think the debrief is okay, but I think later on, I know my limited experience as a police officer, it was always later on. When you're in the moment, you're a professional and you're working, but and your point of coming upon a situation that has some familiarity with it, a child that's the same age as yours or something like that, it really hits home, and it really does. Oh, I guess it just throws that stress management technique that you've been doing right out the window. We're going to talk a little bit about administration and the department's support or lack thereof, because I think that's a big issue. Thank God they people like you who are in there. And you're right, some of these things are very common. People can tell. Like, yeah, that constant vigilance. My mother said I'd be really good at that job because I'm always looking for trouble. Yeah, well, so yeah, I guess I was. But that's a cop's job. We were talking before, and you said how they run towards danger. Yeah, that's their job. That's what the paramedics do. That's what a fire. How crazy you have to be to run into a building that's on fire.
I've asked
That's,
myself that question about my father every day.
and they do it every day to save our
Mhm.
lives. So those are obvious to the public, like me and to people I know. But there's a lot of things that are hidden stressors that are part of these jobs that the public might not be aware of. When it comes to first responders, what are some of the hidden things that you think are stresses that we may not be thinking of when we
Well,
look at that job?
absolutely. I feel like sometimes that administrative burden, the fact that you're working a 7 a.m. shift, but then you're swinging to midnight and you have to show up for court, and court doesn't function
Yeah.
on their schedule, it functions on court schedule. And so you might have just worked a midnight. You've been on call because staffing issues and shortages. So you've worked more than an 8-hour shift or more than a 12-hour shift. And then you go home, excuse me, and you maybe get an hour of sleep before you need to go to court to review that case. I feel like sometimes the lack of decompression, that
Mhm.
is something that I feel like a lot of folks really struggle with, because even if you work 4 days on and you're off for three, you're usually getting emailed or text messaged on your department phone. I know when I worked at one of the larger police agencies, I got a text from my supervisor on my personal phone every Sunday. And so it's just a lot of engagement, almost with limited boundaries, right?
Right.
I feel like the other piece that this blew my mind, and we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but this idea that, especially as an LEO, that you're chasing down somebody potentially who is threatening. And if they are injured after, and they might be fighting you, they might be on many substances, there might be a whole lot of things going on there. And after you subdue the threat, you're supposed to provide life-sustaining support services to them.
That's
And
the
to me,
job.
that's just, yeah. And I had never actually sat down and thought about that prior to working in this agency, because I just didn't know what I didn't know. And I feel like that's one of the major things, is that the image armor, right? That's another stressor that I
Yeah.
think, because everybody functions very well. And it's kind of like, I don't want to be the person that's not doing well, right? So they put on this really tough exterior that they're doing fine. In some instances they are, but in a lot of instances that's that image armor, because we can't appear weak.
Right. I think
Hmm.
that's right on. I think you're exactly what some of the things that the public are just not aware of is just the ins and out of the job, of day to day things, like you said, administrative kind of things and paperwork. And I remember, oh my God, this was a long time ago, folks. So my first arrest, my first collar took 30 hours.
Gosh.
And depending on what you're doing, that's why that only happens to the younger guys. I was a rookie, and because we could last for 30 hours, if you did it to a guy my age, you'd kill him. But things like that, you're right. I mean, it's the schedule, the constant. I don't want it good. I want it at an hour, and things like that. You're right. And the public needs to be aware of that, because when they're dealing with a police officer, you know what? I think it's more common for people to understand that when they go to an ER in a hospital, that doctor may be on his hour 15 or 18 or whatever. They don't think about that when it comes to the police or a firefighters or a paramedic.
Mhm.
I was happy to see that police departments, I think it was at the behest of unions, had to put in a contract that you had to have 8 hours in between shifts, because otherwise you had to show up, like you said, the next day for court. And depending on what you were doing, if you made a drug bust in the old days, you had to go to the lab, to court, back to it was back and forth. And that's a very stressful kind of job, on top of the things that we commonly think of. Now, I saw that you, and you mentioned it before, developed a program for critical incident stress management, which I think is awesome. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, luckily, Virginia State Police had already had a critical incident team in place. And so the sergeants that kind of worked through that were certified peer support specialists. And then they also had chaplaincy programs. And being the psychologist on staff who was responsible for wellness, I was directing that. We started doing more group supervision where we kind of talked about cases and maintaining confidentiality. And there were some legal precedents that were set that the first sergeant was kind of worried about. So he would talk about that as well. My program was a little bit different than the critical incident stress management program, but it worked in tandem with it. And so I was actually employed by the police department, and I would do a psychoeducational class for in-service training. And that just kind of looked at common signs and symptoms of depression, anxiety, PTSD. It offered psychoeducation about the nature of trauma and the nature of critical incidents. It did have that 180 average critical incidents over the course of a 25-year included in it, and just kind of talking about how me as a civilian might only experience two, and just kind of getting the gravity of the type of work that they do, the types of experiences that they have. It also worked towards reducing the stigma, because I think a lot of folks thought that I was there to evaluate their fitness for duty, and I was not a part of that. I think they were also going to tell me don't drink, or they thought I was going to tell them don't drink. And I'm of the mindset of, we talked about kind of the subjectivity of substance use disorders in general, and that, if I'm at home every night drinking 4 White Claws, because there's no law with the claw, if I'm at home doing that and I think everything's wonderful, then do I have a functional impairment, which would result in a disorder? And so kind of offering some education about what that looks like, because I do feel like, culturally competent approaches to law enforcement and first responders is critical. And understanding the nature of their culture is, it prides itself on that camaraderie, on getting together and having a few after work, after a tough shift, after an intense day, right? And who am I to say don't do that? And so it was really geared towards trying to understand the culture that I worked in. And then, of course, one of the most stabilizing means of treatment is outpatient therapy, especially when it focuses on suicide prevention, which was my real focus. Because one of the things when I first got there, I had some opportunity to really dive deep into everything that Google Scholar had to offer in terms of police psychology, in terms of suicide prevention. And what really struck me is that on average, folks who self-select to become law enforcement and first responders, respectively, are more resilient just based on the data. And then, of course, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, wait a minute, how is it that people who are more resilient than myself and my civilian counterparts killing themselves in record numbers? And that's why the focus was really on suicide prevention. So what would happen is I kind of had the best of both worlds because I used the chain of command uh to my advantage. And so if somebody who is a captain said, I have this direct report, I think he's struggling, I want him to come see you, he would come see me. And so I wouldn't relay any confidential information. I treated it kind of like if I were working with a parole officer. Yes, he showed up. Yes, he's participating. We're good. And so that was nice. And then one of the other things that was really helpful was that a lot of people self-selected to come see me. So I got the opportunity to work with people who were actively choosing because they saw that they were hitting some red flags that I had educated them on in their in-service, and sent me an email. And so I would work with them. And in some instances, it was trauma work. In some instances, it was just, I mean, there's a lot of interpersonal relationships in the departments. And so sometimes that's a blessing and sometimes that's a curse. And so working on some of those things, working on women's issues within a male dominated field, lots of interesting cases that I got to work with. And so in under a year, what was really magical about that is that we got that one person that said, I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for you in this service. And so I paid for my salary in under a year.
Now, you brought up some things that really hit home. I mean, um, first of all, of course, the suicide prevention thing. You talk about the culture. A lot of people don't realize the culture of police officers. Just the one I understand. And there's a reason it's called a blue wall. They put up a wall. They won't let anybody in. And I'm so happy that they have somebody like you that they can finally go to before that stress becomes so overwhelming that it becomes a diagnosable problem, and now they're thinking suicide. So I have to thank you for that, because I have heard of instances of people I were on a job with many years later who did take that route, and it was just heartbreaking. And you mentioned one of their go-tos for stress management was drinking after work. And so, by the way, that's called choir practice. And if you ever want to read a book about it, it's called Choir Boys, and I was one of them. And yeah, it was even if you didn't drink, you still went because you wanted to be part of that culture, and more so than any other job. And you please correct me if I'm wrong. You're the expert in this, not me. But I've seen police officers, and those are the ones that I know, stick with just other police officers. Their entire social circle are police officers. And unless their wife or their husband brings in somebody else into that social circle, that's who they ended up staying with. I wanted to ask you, police officers have to have an annual physical. I do not believe that they have to have an annual or yearly mental health checkup. If we were to make that mandatory, that every police officer, patrolman to deputy inspector, I don't care, had to have a yearly mental health checkup, would that not help take the stigma away from doing it?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm the type of person that I don't want to get red flagged for saying this, but I feel like um, everybody should have annual mental health wellness, much like I go for my physical every year.
Right.
It's just that the prescription for mental health wellness is a little bit different than once a year, right? I mean,
Right.
I think when you sit and you think about, okay, if my mother has bipolar disorder and my father is out of the picture, right? There's two things right there on the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, that increases my risk for developing a psychiatric condition. Where is the wellness? Where's the preventative care there, right? And so I feel like when you bring up topics about preventative care in law enforcement, I think it's absolutely critical and the first responder community, because excuse me, they're in a high stress job, right? Even if you don't go through a critical incident, your first call is not 30 hours, right? If you are in a high stress job, it is your priority to manage. Much like if I'm predisposed to have cardiac issues, I should probably have a no fry list and
Yeah.
exercise and do all of those things that work towards management of that, because I know I have a family history, right? So if I know going in that my job is going to be on average much more stressful than the typical job, and then you add on top of it those administrative crises and some of the things that just raise our heart rate and our blood pressure a little bit, then being really intentional in terms of being very clear and lucid in how am I doing? How is my central nervous system? I understand I can't sleep anytime I want to because I have to work swing shifts. But when I am sleeping, do I need alcohol to get to bed? Do I need 20 milligrams of melatonin to get to sleep? Do I have to take trazodone? Like all of those things are indicative of problems. And
Right.
so being intentional, and it's kind of like they're so intentional in so many other things. I mean, that's one of the things that working with the police made me feel warm fuzzies, because they're so practical. If I didn't have a little ice pick in my car, somebody did, and I knew I could flag somebody over and they'd be there to help me, because that's what they do,
Right.
is they get things done. And so, yes, I feel like you'd probably have a lot more folks uh, who aren't stressed out. I mean, the cardiac issues for long-term law enforcement and first responders, I mean, and they're so common, it's a line of duty death. And so having some of these factors play in as to how stress is contributing to psychiatric conditions, how going and having a beer or two after work makes sense, but having it every night because you can't sleep is it's a different story. And so it really, and if somebody was there that they felt comfortable with, who wasn't going to take their badge and gun away, who isn't there to judge them on their behavior, but to be very open and candid with, I feel like you might not have some there's always going to be struggles, but you might not have all of the struggles that they deal with on a day to day.
You're right. And you know what? First of all, of course, you're right. The unhealthy stress management stuff is just that. It's unhealthy. If you need to drink it at any night to get to sleep, it's first of all, it's not going to work. I promise. You're going to drink, you're going to fall asleep. And when the alcohol gets processed in your body, you're going to wake up. But besides all of that, the stress itself of the job is such a catalyst for all the things that Kate says. It, cardiovascular problems and pulmonary problems, and stress can lead to these diagnosable problems like anxiety and depression and heart failure. It's been linked to so many things. If you want to know more about that, just go to stress.org. We have a list of the 50 top things that stress can lead to. A doctor told me the other day that 75% of doctor visits can be directly related to stress issues. I thought that was an amazing number, but we have to think about that. So you have to think about what first responders are going through and why they have cardiac problems. When they get into their 50s, when they're young men and women, and they're suffering from these things. It's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, we know there's a problem. It's an obvious problem. Some of the things are obvious, I should say. What do we do? And what are some stress management techniques that should be integrated every day, or at least most days, for first responders? For instance, I know you're a big believer in yoga. So am I. I just can't do it, but I do believe in it. But I have other things I do to relieve my stress. What should first responders be thinking? What kind of management techniques can they do?
So, the first and foremost, I am going to say yoga. And the reason I say that is because it maximizes 7 out of the 9 pillars of wellness in one foul activity. And so I'm a girl who likes to maximize my efforts. And
Right.
so what I really feel is beneficial in that regard, I mean, systems don't last for thousands of years by mouth without having a lot of validity and a lot of efficacy. And so I feel like that's one thing. When now you say you can't do yoga, I'm not talking about that yoga where you're standing on your head and you're bending yourself up like a pretzel. I'm talking about slowing down, cultivating a sense of safety, right? You talk about the hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is necessary for law enforcement and first responder survival. Having acknowledged that, when you're hypervigilant, your central nervous system is upregulated, and so there is no restoration. When we are stressed out, digestion, all of the healing stops. And so let's say you had a 30-hour call and you're exhausted. Well, if you're still hypervigilant laying in your bed, which a lot of folks are, then you're not going to get a restorative sleep and your body's not going to promote any healing. So I feel like this idea of cultivating a sense of safety, right? Safety in the body, safety in the environment, safety emotionally. And that's a nebulous concept. But when you come right down to it, something as basic as smelling suntan lotion. I had a professor when she had to review all of our research methods in like March. She would come in. Oh, it was in Scranton, Pennsylvania too. So the weather was terrible. And she'd come in and she'd be smelling her suntan lotion because it made her feel calm and relaxed. And she was very interested in odor and mood. And so it made sense. But something as simple as smelling something that immediately calms you down. There's the safe, calm place, which is a strategy from EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing theory, where we work with a trained provider to cultivate a safe, calm place. And so you can say those words or think about that place, and it immediately works towards kind of calming and soothing and relaxing. Uh, I feel like, excuse me, I feel like the other piece that's really important is some level of physical activity. We were meant to move. Our bodies were designed to be physically active. And so it might be 30 minutes of walking, Tabata, high intensity interval training, yoga, Zumba. I mean, anything that gets the body and the blood flowing, it works wonders in terms of stress management. Getting out in nature, it is so simple. And it doesn't have to be the 4-hour fishing trip. It could be a 10-minute walk in a green place, and that's going to boost your mood. It's going to produce serotonin, which makes us feel a little bit better. And so those would be things that I think would be helpful. I mean, but even still too, because I know that it's show up to work early, it's prepare for work, it's getting up and doing the morning routine, right? So there's a lot of like barriers to getting that done. So something as simple as box breathing, although mine's more like rectangular breathing, but 8 seconds in, hold 2, 8 seconds out, hold 2, repeat 8 times, 8, 8, 8. It's so simple. And you slow your respiration enough that calms down the heart rate, that relieves high blood pressure in the moment, and it allows for just a quick down and dirty. So that's something that could even be done on the job in between calls, on the way to the call. I mean, I understand we want to be focused and we're driving high speeds to get to wherever we need to be, but being very conscious and intentional, and it goes back to that intention. So those would be a couple that would just be right off the top that could be something really
Yeah,
quick.
we're a we're big cheerleaders of breathing exercises at AIS. You know, I do it. I do it every day. That meditation former chief Richard Beale, um, before he retired, and I'm sorry I don't remember what department he was chief of. He used to teach yoga and meditation classes to the officers in the department, and it worked wonders. I think that you're right. I mean, everybody's daily routine is different, especially first responders. You never know what your daily routine is going to be. Excuse me. With the breathing exercises, what's so great about them? It's always with you, no special equipment, and it's free. And it really does make a difference. So that's a great way to integrate stress management into your daily routine for them.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing I want to talk to you about, because we mentioned the culture, especially in police department, fire departments, paramedics, and in that particular job, I see it more often than the other jobs I've had, the other careers and professions I've been involved with. I wanted to ask you about peer support programs. Um, First responders really relate to other first responders for their mental health. Are there any in place that you know of where it's a more formal than just talking to a buddy?
Yeah, so Virginia State Police did have that peer support team. And what was really nice about their peer support team is that they followed the rules of confidentiality. So CISM, which is the Critical Incident Stress Management Team, was actually developed for firefighters. And so it was initially worked with firefighters. But they adopted that CISM model. And I feel like I really like the idea of peer support because I do think it's really helpful in terms of, somebody saying, yes, I can relate, and yes, this will get better. And yes, maybe we should seek out professional treatment, and that's not a judgment thing. But they kind of are the first line of defense, in my opinion, because somebody can come and talk to them, and the department doesn't have to know about it. It's
Right.
held with confidence. And so I find it to be extremely valuable in that regard. I feel like part of the concern, much like part of the concern about when I was working for a department, I work for the department, they work for the department. And if there's any rumors within that department that they are talking, then you'll see a massive drop in the amount of folks that actually utilize the peer support team. And so I think that they're wonderful, provided that they can maintain their reputation to provide that confidence that folks are looking for. And
Do most police departments have that in
I
your
don't know
experience?
if most police departments have that, because I know what Virginia State Police, we would offer support to look to smaller departments who might not necessarily have the resources, because that's a staff member you're either making do extra work, or
Right.
you're taking away from the road. And so I feel like probably not most departments, but the bigger ones, I would imagine, have something, or at least are working towards development of those peer supports. And if they don't have the peer supports, I do know there's several firefighter EMS agencies up in Northern Virginia who actually contract with either a specialized EAP or a private practice, and then that person. So, for instance, there's the first responders clinicians group that I'm a member of, and they meet once a month or something to that effect. But it's a bunch of folks who, hey, I know this person looking for specific qualifications. Can anybody take this? And so there's a lot of resources there, but it's not necessarily peers.
You think that's because there's still in those professions that stigma that if I'm out there, if I need help, I'm somehow weaker or unable to do my job?
Oh, yes. I mean, it's not it's not even weak. There is something morally wrong with your character. And that is, I mean, as you well know, that's something that police and first responders pride themselves on, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they join this because they're self-selected, and so there's a calling to even be involved in something like this. And then when it seems like everybody else is handling that same incident we all responded to better than me, right? Then there's definitely that, like, I'm the weak link. And that was the other part of the psychoeducational component in the wellness program that I've developed, was talking about no, this isn't something morally wrong with your character. This is something that's too much, too fast, too soon for your brain to process. And it's kryptonite for Superman. And I would even show that 70s clip from from Superman 1 where Miss Tessmacher dives in and saves him, and Superman had no problem asking for help. And
Right.
nobody ever thought Superman was weak when Miss Tessmacher dives in and saves him. So I think that's part of the issue, is that, you have these folks that pride themselves on their individual capacity to manage things, and they look around and see everybody else seems to be doing fine, so I should be doing fine.
I think a lot of departments, well, I shouldn't say that. Some departments still rely on the old tried and true mentorship thing where the veteran Leos and the veteran firefighters and first responders help out the younger guys because they're more experienced. And I think I actually like that because for a couple of reasons. One is, as an older guy, when I'm helping out the younger guys, it's cathartic for me
Mm-hmm.
as their teacher, as their mentor, and it helps them to show that yes, other people have been through it, and you can get through it too. What changes do you think need to happen? I mean, culturally, policy wise. I mean, what do we need to do better in the departments now to address the mental health issue and the crisis? We talked quickly about um, suicide ideology amongst first responders. Only because that's a whole nother show in itself, and we've done that show, and it's extremely important. But what do we need to do better? How do we change things just even a little bit culturally to help these
the
people?
the data consistently pointed to leadership promoting how they valued the mental health piece of things. And so that might mean, because I feel like it depends, right? I worked for a state-based agency, and so you didn't get to see a lot of the folks you went to the academy with often. And then as things went up and up and up, I mean, this, like, the lieutenant colonels and the colonel himself were kind of like celebrities. And so utilizing that power and that kind of like, here I am, right? I feel like would make a lot of sense in terms of, here's Dr. So and so. I
Right.
talk to them. It means that I'm taking care of my mental wellness, and I want you to do the same. Anything you say to her is held with the strictest of confidence. I can't even ask her without your permission, right? And then you have it straight from the horse's mouth. And I mean, he doesn't even have to appear, or she. It's more along the lines of sending out an email saying, I've had a wonderful conversation with on staff psychologist, and here's what I think, and here's how I think they can be beneficial, and I want you to utilize this resource because she's here for you. Right. And so I think that that would be something that, again, you utilize, that people look up to the chief of police, the head of the department, because they're there for a valid reason. They worked hard and they promoted, and they, want to do positive things for the agency. And so I think that would be one thing. I also think right from the academy,
Hmm.
right there, we have a psychologist on staff. Be intentional about management of your emotional wellness, because this job will kill you if you don't. And I feel like if they were really cognizant of that, and I met the oncoming academy students the day after HR met them, you know what I mean? I feel like that would be something that would be extremely beneficial for them. And, it also, when, I mean, everybody knows that Google has an amazing wellness program that nobody uses, but it's there. And that's part of what brings people in. So you also address some of the recruitment issues just by knowing that we care about your emotional well-being.
It's funny, I never thought about those two things before, and they are fantastic ideas. Let the
Thank you.
leaders lead the way to mental health. Right? Have them say, not just the chief, the captains, the sergeants, the lieutenants, say, look, guys, just want you to know I was having a problem and I went to see them. I feel better. There's nothing wrong with it. So if you're doing it, if you want me to tell you about it, I will be glad to do it. Make it seem more normal. If you had a broken bone, you'd go to a doctor. If you're having such stress that you have anxiety issues where you need to take something to help you sleep, you need to see a doctor. You need to see a professional, someone who deals with that day in and day out. Kate, you gave us some really great things to think about, and I hope that everybody out there is starting to realize the monumental issues that first responders have to go through besides just doing their job, besides facing the bad guys, besides facing a fire where people die. And lately, fire has been a big issue. Just look what's going on in California.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for that. I mean, I think we could talk a lot more about this. I want to invite you to write an article for us for Combat Stress Magazine. Maybe people can look more in depth and to what are the management techniques that they can use, the stress management tools that they need to have every day. The breathing one, yoga is a great one. When I said I can't do it, I mean, I've tried. And I just do other things. I mean, it's not, but you're so on point about all the things that we need to do. So I want to thank you for that. But we do have one last question. I ask all my guests, so I'm going to ask you too. Kate, it's having a stressful day. What is your personal go-to? What do you do when you're feeling like your stress levels are a little too high?
Well, let's see here. I have a couple that, I mean, of course I do yoga every day, or at least try to. I do this self-administered massage, which is another thing that I've incorporated into my wellness program, and it's called reflexive performance reset. And this is something that the Navy SEALs use. It's something that the NFL players use. Essentially what it does, it's a neuromuscular, neurolymphatic, and fascia release. And it takes about 10 minutes and it's so quick, and I feel like jelly after. And because I carry so much stress and tension in my body, it just really is amazing. I love it. And then I am a dancer and a singer, so I will dance and sing.
I also dance and sing. No one's ever asked me to do it twice, but I and I dance like nobody's looking.
Me too. We should have a little group sometime. I promise I'll let you do it more than once.
Absolutely. It's not going to happen. Too many people have cell phones. Not going to happen. Thank you so much, Kate. Again, I'm going to put your website up and so people can find out more information about it. I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all the information that you've given us and bringing awareness to this really critical, important topic. Let's not lose another first responder because they're overwhelmed by stress. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your service. To those folks out there, thank you for your service. I'm here as a service provider for all. It is my passion. Thank you so much for having me. It's really been my pleasure. And I look forward to any other things you want me to do with you.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us today. We're running out of time. This has been your host, Will Heckman. Once again, I want to invite you to go to stress.org, find out all that we have to offer there. Consider becoming a member. Don't forget to please follow this podcast and subscribe. And I want to remind you, just as stress is different for each of us, there is no one stress reduction or management strategy that is right for everyone. So that means you need to join us next time.